So, I think I've done all the Zoom controls I need to do. So, welcome everybody to Dharma Coach Share. Whether you're watching this live right now on the 13th of May 2020, or whether you're watching it another time on YouTube, just welcome whoever you are, wherever in the world you are. And whenever you happen to be watching this, I suppose. I'm giving this talk in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's quite a special time to be giving a talk. But it's also a time of great potential, actually, as well. I was talking to a friend of mine who's very interested in the problem of climate change, and we were saying that this could be a tipping point in a good way, this pandemic, in the sense that the whole culture of the world kind of just tips into a better relationship with the environment, and then things could just get, well, we could just become much more responsible and effective at relating to our environment from here on, because it's a time when we all pause and stop and think about what really matters in life. I know that some of us are very busy and possibly quite stressed, worrying about our job and our livelihood, possibly homeschooling, possibly working in the health and care settings, and really almost at our limit in terms of giving and coping with life. And others are in lockdown and with a lot of time on your hands. And those of us who are in lockdown with quite a lot of spare time, we have a special opportunity to use that time to contemplate on life and what really matters. It's a little bit like where you go on retreat and you leave all your busyness behind, and you've got 7 days perhaps for the retreat, and in that space you've got an opportunity with much less to do to just contemplate about what really matters and focus in on the deeper questions, like what life is really all about, and consider the bigger picture of nature and our place in it all, our time in history, and the nature of reality as well. So in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, as we're living right now in 2020, for those of us who have got time, we have an opportunity, and you could say that we have a responsibility to use that time well for our brothers and sisters around the world who don't have that opportunity, who are desperately rushing about trying to make a living and stay alive, keep their job together, look after their family, and look after other people's health as well. I guess that for those of us who are watching it live, quite a lot of us, like me, are in lockdown, and we've got time to ponder things. We've got time to meditate perhaps. And I want to I want to share a few things that I've been pondering on, and I also want this week to talk to you about ways of working with fear. So the title this week is called Working with Courage and Fear. Human beings, most people have some difficulty with anxiety. I'd say, whether they like to admit it or not. Some people keep it very well hidden, even from themselves. But at a time of where there's a lot of talk of sickness and death and old age, it's a time when fear is easily aroused. Last week I gave a talk and I was talking about how it was the Buddha contemplating the facts of sickness and old age and death, and also wondering about a possibility of coming to terms with that in a much, much more effective way. This is what motivated him to set out on his quest. And I was saying last week that we all have the first three sights, the first three of those four sights, very much with us every day. It's in every news broadcast, talk of sickness. Very often talk of old age, because of course old people are more likely to get sick, and that's always been the case. It's true now as well. And also talk about death. You get a new statistic every day about how many people have so far died of the pandemic. So we're very aware of sickness, old age and death right now. And from the Buddhist point of view, that is an opportunity to contemplate that reality, because human life, this is the human condition. We have always been subject to old age, sickness and death. But in our modern industrial culture, we have got into a way of trying to find happiness by gravitating to pleasures and then trying to forget about things like that. So we, in our culture in the UK, for example, we have a way of dealing with death, which means that it's kind of like brief, and its funerals usually last maybe 15 minutes, half an hour, and usually the corpse is not on display. And then it's out of sight, out of mind, and it's returning to normality, which is a life where you don't think about it very much, for most people anyway. Actually, that was true at the time of the Buddha too. This is the picture of a Buddha here. When he was a young man, he had a life of luxury. He was born into an aristocratic family, had everything he needed. And his family was very keen on all that too, you know, pursuing pleasures and not thinking about death, because it kind of makes you feel uncomfortable. So in some ways, our modern culture, the kind of thing that the advertising industry likes to promote, for example, is that pursuit of happiness. And the young Prince Siddhartha, who became the Buddha, saw through that, and then he set out to find a better way of coming to terms with sickness, old age and death. And what finally motivated him to go forth was that he saw a wandering holy man who had given up his worldly responsibilities, and he'd renounced all his possessions. He was living outside, he had no home, he begged his food, but he had plenty of time to consider that and to meditate and find ways of coming to terms with impermanence in a new way. And this is what inspired the young prince to set out on his spiritual quest, which culminated in him becoming the Buddha and then founding what has become a worldwide religion that has lasted 25 centuries and is still flourishing. So that was last week. That was last week's talk, just to recap. And I wanted to recap because this one follows on from where I left off last week. What I said last week was that the Buddha found what he was looking for in the sense that he attained Bodhi, which is a word for enlightenment, which is where the word Buddha comes from. It's another word for nirvana. Well, similar word to nirvana anyway. They both mean enlightenment. And this nirvana, Bodhi, they're sometimes called the place of peace. There are many appellations for this nirvana: the harbour of refuge, the island of sanctuary, the cool cave, and the place of peace. And what that means is that even in the midst of old age, sickness and death, it's possible to find peace. It's possible to make your peace with all that so that you're not scared anymore. You are at peace. Not only at peace, but wise and compassionate and deeply, deeply fulfilled. It's coming into a new relationship with life and death, which is much, much more satisfying and fulfilling than the way of just trying to forget about it and pursuing pleasure. That way of doing it is living with continual pretense and illusion and wishful thinking, really. And it's a kind of continual struggle to keep on trying to get pleasures and forget about pains and forget about scary things. And it doesn't actually lead to the ultimate fulfillment or very much in the way of peace, unless it's just temporary peace. Sooner or later something reminds you of the truth of impermanence again. Right now, impermanence is very obvious all around us, but if we can follow the Buddha's example, it's possible to train our minds, our emotional states, learn the skills of having to steer our way into a way of being where you're at peace with impermanence. And the culmination of that is Buddhahood itself. So that's what I was talking about last week. I was saying that normally when you're aware of impermanence you feel fear, and the natural thing to do when you're scared is to look for somewhere to hide, a safe place. You're looking desperately for a safe place to go. In other words, a refuge. And the Buddha knew that, and one of his teachings that he said, well, the human condition is a condition of fear and insecurity, yes, but the best way of going for refuge in the midst of all that is to seek out the place of peace. Because when you attain that, there is no fear. You're completely at peace. That solves the problem of where to find a safe place, because it just evaporates. You no longer need a safe place because you feel so much at peace that it feels like you've already arrived. Of course, the place of peace isn't a geographical location. You haven't literally arrived somewhere, moved somewhere, but you've arrived in a new way of being, which is a new relationship to life and death, a new relationship to the world and to other people. We get glimpses of that new relationship when we feel love. I mean pure love, not just possessive, exclusive love, but those moments where you just feel you love everything, including yourself. Very, very beautiful moments. When you feel loveliness is everywhere. Perhaps you've had experiences like that when you've been out hill walking in the country, or watching the sunrise, or on retreat. Maybe your beautiful day halfway through a retreat at Dharmakoshi, you've had an experience like that. So that's a kind of glimpse of the new relationship with reality. And Buddhahood is, as I understand it, it's like dwelling in that open-hearted place all the time, no matter what's happening. Where you don't feel cut off from things, you feel part of everything. You no longer feel there's me in here and then a big, nasty, scary world out there, and I've got to defend myself from it, or grab things from it and then push it away. And this kind of struggle is the unenlightened way of being. And from the point of view of enlightened beings, it is, when they look back on that time, it's they probably shudder at the memory of it, now that they have attained the place of peace. Well, as you practice the path of training, you're likely to have more and more glimpses of that. But then, of course, you sort of default back into the ordinary way of being, which is kind of the separated off way of being, where you're subject to fear and craving and anger and all sorts of illusions, delusions of separateness. But then you get another glimpse and you think, wow, a new way of being, which kind of like entices you to keep practicing and move closer. So this new way of seeking refuge that I was talking about, when you feel scared and insecure and you look for a refuge and you heed the Buddha's words of seek out the place of peace. The place of peace is an epithet for Buddhahood itself, enlightenment. You set out on the path to enlightenment, and then the path that you set out on is the path of practice, the path of training. And that too is a safe place to be. It's a safe direction in which to head, because it's bringing you closer to the ultimate solution. And then on the path you meet other people who are also heading the same way, and you can make friends with them. And they're heading the same way, and they've decided to make a priority too of moving towards the place of peace in this path of training. And in the community of fellow practitioners, you find this is a good place to make really good friends. As many of us know who have been practicing in this way, you tend to make good friends. Why do you make good friends? Because people like that go out of their way to speak and act ethically and treat other people well. So people like that tend to make good friends. And in the end you can start feeling that the community of practitioners is another kind of a refuge in a way. It's not the ultimate refuge. The ultimate refuge is attaining the place of peace. But it's pretty good on the way there. It feels sometimes like the community of practitioners, the Sangha, is a kind of place of sanity, where outside that, where people are rushing around trying to get away from reality and hide and escape and spend, entertain, and but that's kind of madness, really. And then you go on retreat at Dharmakosha, which most people regard as a bit weird, and you find yourself kind of like talking about things that really matter, and it's kind of like a return to sanity. So it really can feel like a refuge from the madness when you spend time with your community of people on the path. So we regard these in the Buddhist tradition as the three refuges, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. I like to include, when I'm giving these talks, I like to make them accessible and understandable to complete newcomers. I've been teaching newcomers for about 20 years at Dharmakosha, but I also want to include quite a lot about the kind of practice I do. I've been practicing the Buddhist teaching for decades, about, 4 decades or so. And I want to share what I do to work with fear and courage, because I'm not enlightened, It's all very well for the Buddhas to be completely fearless. Apparently they are fearless. I thought I'd kind of do a bit of background reading and make sure that this was really the case. I haven't done nearly as much study of Buddhist scriptures as Smritiratna, who founded this movement. But I found in this book, I'm going to read it out, he says, more than any other religion does Buddhism realize the havoc which may be wrought in the mind by fear, worry and anxiety, and the consequent importance of developing fearlessness as an integral part of the spiritual life. In the scriptures, the Buddha himself is invariably depicted as devoid of even the faintest trace of fear. His confidence is unshakable. That comes from Smritiratna's book called The Survey of Buddhism. And hard to understand, how could any human being be completely devoid of even the faintest trace of fear? But apparently so. This is at least what the scriptures say, what the Buddhist tradition tells us, that ultimately you go into a place beyond fear. It kind of makes sense in the sense that when you're living a life of non-duality, when there's no separation between a self in here and a world out there, or you just experience reality as just one, and you don't divide it off into me and not me, then who is there to defend from what? I mean, fear is all about trying to keep me safe from a nasty world out there. But if you've dropped that duality completely and you live your whole life, 24/7 in that open non-duality, then there isn't anybody to defend from anything else. There's just one. So I guess I can at least understand it logically. But I must admit that even after 4 decades of practice, I still have to work with fear and anxiety on a daily basis. Could be because I've personally, I happen to have quite an anxious temperament, and always have since I was a little boy. I've always had to work with that. My close friends say, yeah, you get anxious a lot. But I've been working on it for a long time, and I want to share with you some of the things that work for me. Because I still get anxious just by hearing on the news about people on ventilators who are struggling for breath. It reminds me that might be me one day, and then I get scared. And if I was enlightened, presumably that wouldn't happen, but it does, it just does. And I kind of can't help it. I can't help being the sort of person I am for the time being. but I know what to do. I have a whole repertoire of things that I can do. And I just wanted to share with you some of the things that I do. So this is my 7 basics for working with courage and fear. And they are as follows. 1. Courage is crucial. 2. Take heart by attending to what you trust and appreciate. 3. Trust the trustworthy. 4. Appreciate the lovely. 5. Let fear arise within grounded awareness. 6. No need to be afraid of fear. 7. When you feel scared, have compassion for the frightened. So I'll just go through them one by one. So the first one is courage is crucial. That's why I call this talk not just working with fear, but working with courage and fear. Because in my experience, to cope with fear, I have to continuously encourage myself, cultivate courage. The word courage comes from the word for heart. It comes from the French courage, which comes from their word la coeur, which means the heart. And the word courage is related to core and cardiac. So I hope you can see that courage is all about heart. And that's why a lot of the old words for courage have got heart in them. The old idioms, I mean. People talk about losing heart, feeling downhearted, feeling disheartened. And then they talk about taking heart once more and feeling heartened again, or even feeling hearty. So when you feel down at heart, when you have lost heart, then somehow you need to find a way to take heart once more. You need to encourage yourself somehow. And this moves on to the second one. Take heart by attending to what you trust and appreciate. Well, I'll try and explain it like this. If we constantly attend to things that scare us, then it's no wonder that we feel scared all the time. But you can choose what you attend to. And in the Buddhist tradition, this is given a lot of emphasis, the fact that you can choose what you attend to. The whole system of practice known as mindfulness is about choosing what you attend to and then making a practice of attending to something that, well, what you need to attend to just now. Obviously, when, say, the fire alarm goes off, then what you need to attend to is where the exit is and how to get there as soon as possible, you know. But say on a day when you have got quite a lot of time on your hands, it's not necessarily to tune into the news and find the latest statistics on COVID like 10, 20, 30, 40 times a day. It's not necessary. And if you keep doing that all the time over and over again, you're basically attending to scary things, and thereby you're keeping yourself in a state of fear all the time through what you're doing, through where you're choosing to place your attention. If you place your attention on what you trust, what you love, what you appreciate, then the natural thing is to calm down, and then as your mind calms down, your heart opens and you feel that sense of oneness. You don't feel separated off anymore. You enter into a mental state of openness and kindness, and this is what we call, well, in Smritiratna we call it creative mind. Smritiratna was particularly interested in this transition from reactive mind to creative mind. When you're in a state of fear, you're in reactive mind, and the whole mind narrows down, and you're very preoccupied with looking after number one desperately, and you can become quite selfishly, ruthlessly self-preoccupied in that state. And kind of state people are in when they just clear the supermarket shelves of sanitizer, for example. They're just thinking in a very narrow way about themselves, or maybe me and my personal family, but never mind anybody else. But it's because they fear, it's because they're scared. It's like that when you're scared. You narrow down onto what seems to be the urgency, which is looking after number one, or just me and mine, and never mind anybody else. So this is reactive mind, and characterized by greed, hatred and delusion. But if you can turn towards what you trust and appreciate, the mind tends to calm down, the heart opens, you drop out of greed, hatred and delusion, or at least they become much, much less severe. And then you can end up in a much more kind and compassionate, open-minded, wise, calm, tranquil state of mind. And which is the kind of state that a Buddha can live in all the time, no matter what happens. So take heart by turning towards what you trust and appreciate. Number 3, you might be thinking, well, what can I trust? You might be thinking, well, what is there for me to appreciate? Well, number 3 is trust the trustworthy, which might sound a bit of a sort of circular thing to say, but what that means is trust what you have found to be trustworthy in your experience, because you only discover what is trustworthy by, well, just life experience, don't you? You might trust something temporarily and then it lets you down and then you don't trust it the same way. Or maybe you only trust it on certain occasions, but you're wise to what it's really like and you don't fully trust it. Maybe your trust is more conditional. So as you get older, if you pay attention to what you're discovering, you learn what you can trust and what you can't trust. So you learn to trust what you have found to be trustworthy. So that's what I mean, trust what you have found to be trustworthy. The last few years, I was in therapy a few years ago, and it put me in touch with how scared I was when I was a little boy, and how I'd always had a problem with trust, trusting other people, and trusting anything really, trusting the world, trusting the outside world. I used to, my nickname at school was Dreamer, because I was so often gone, absent-minded, in my world of my own, in a world. It was my refuge from the outside world, which didn't feel safe. a lot of the time. So I retreated into me and my thoughts, and it was my coping strategy at that age. And there was distrust of pretty much everything else. And then while I was in therapy, I realized that actually my whole adult life has been dogged by that tendency to distrust people and the world, you know. So I've been making a priority about really considering what I can trust and then letting myself trust it. And that way, what the effect it has had on me is that it has really helped me to really settle into and relax into what I can trust. And one of the first things that I thought of when I thought, well, what can I trust, was the ground, the steady ground. Here in the UK, we are fortunate to live in a part of the world where we never have earthquakes. We sometimes get a tiny, tiny earth tremor that people hardly notice, but generally speaking, in this part of the world, the ground is almost synonymous with steadiness. I know it's not true for everybody in the world, but for people in this part of the world, for me, the ground means the steady ground, and I can really trust that. And so I spend a lot of time grounding myself, feet touching into the steady ground. And for example, I started to do balasana, yoga pose, sometimes called child pose, which is the sort of thing that tiny children do when they feel insecure. And it's coming down to earth, touching the ground. Padmadarshini, for 8 weeks, she was teaching yoga and meditation online for Dharma twice a week. And all of that's on YouTube. And I can recommend them. I'm sure she's included Balasana in her teachings. She also talks a lot about the steady ground and grounding. And her sessions of yoga, well, she does a yoga session and then she does a meditation session, and they're all on YouTube. I recommend them. Padmadarshini. Particularly recommend the one she did on the last day of March the 31st, which is a special meditation, which is called Earth Meditation, I think it's called. And anyway, you can check it out for yourself. But her whole style of teaching yoga and meditation is very much involves feeling the ground beneath you and letting yourself drop into that sense of steadiness and support. When you do that, it's very easy, much easier to relax, because you're relaxing into something. You're not just relaxing in isolation. You're letting go of your uptight, trying to hold yourself up, trying to be independent, trying to be separate, and you're dropping down into a sense of being part of the earth. And we are part of the earth, we're part of nature. I think if everybody in the world could learn to do this, we would treat nature better, because we would appreciate nature more. Nature provides for us. We are creatures of the earth, and the earth supports us unconditionally, and it's there for us to drop down into. So that's one thing you can do, is trust the earth. And I've come to regard trusting the ground not just in the sense of trusting the physical ground not to quake, which in the ultimate sense you can't do. But I've actually come to think of the earth as a metaphor, as a symbol for the three refuges as well. So one of my devotional practices goes like this. I trust in the ground profound potentiality. I trust in the ground, Dharma, reality. I trust in the ground, true Sangha solidarity. So for me, trusting in the ground is more than just trusting the literal physical ground. And when I lead meditation, I always include resting into the tender stillness of the steady ground. But I'm not just talking literally about the ordinary ground, I'm talking about Buddha mind, ultimately. The tender stillness of the steady ground is a kind of poetic way of indicating Buddha mind, which is the ultimate refuge. If you have found that, then even when there's an earthquake going on, you are at peace in the midst of it all. So that was trust the trustworthy, and particularly talking about the ground. And then what I have come to trust through experience of practicing for the last 4 decades, I've come to trust the Dharma, the Buddhist path of practice, and I've come to trust my practice community. It has its faults, but it's got a lot of really special people in it, and I have lots and lots of really good friends, and I can trust that. I can trust it through experience. You know, I've come to trust Smritiratna Buddhist community through experience, and it's a place where I can find true Sangha solidarity. And again, it's not the ultimate refuge, it's not the place of peace, but it's pretty good. I'm very grateful for it. I appreciate Smritiratna Buddhist community. Somebody who's completely new to this, maybe you don't trust it at all. Maybe you're just, even just listening to an order member is a bit risky, you know, dodgy, you know, because you've read things in the newspapers and seen things on the internet that have led you to distrust. But what I've discovered, this has come through personal experience, is that actually practicing within Smritiratna Buddhist community over 4 decades, I've come to trust it, and I can actually say from experience that what you read in the newspapers and what you see on the internet is very, very one-sided. And what I have actually discovered by practicing within the community is a great deal of value, a great deal I can trust actually. So that's trust the trustworthy. And appreciate the lovely, that's number 4. Well, I appreciate my practice community, but also I appreciate the practice of appreciation. And I make a practice of appreciation. I go out of my way to appreciate things every day. And a few weeks ago, when I first started this series of talks, I gave one called 7 Basics at a Time of Deprivation. And I included this, appreciation and gratitude, in that. And I mentioned an old friend of mine called Dot Bryson, who made a priority about practicing appreciation on a daily basis because she had a lifelong problem with depression and anxiety, and also ill health too. And with my encouragement, she took up a practice of writing a haiku every day. So she looked out for a beautiful moment in the day and she captured it in a poem. And she's now written hundreds and hundreds of these, and I've published them. And the book, the PDF book, has just been uploaded yesterday to our website, so it's there under the resources page. So if you've heard about Dot Bryson from my talks, then now you can download it and read them for yourself. So that's in the way of appreciate the lovely. You've got 10 minutes left, so I'm going to have to do the last three more briefly. The fifth point is let fear arise within grounded, spacious awareness. And the sixth point is no need to be afraid of fear. I can cover those in the same paragraph, if you like, of this talk. One of the things I've learned over my years of practice about fear is that if you try to get rid of it, it just gets worse, because you get into fear of fear, and then you're in a vicious circle. And you can't, there's no point trying to get rid of fear, because then you just make it worse. You're afraid of fear. And the only way of working with fear is to let it be there. And then while the fear is there, you let it be there in the background while you focus on what you can trust and what you appreciate. You might, for example, call to mind the Buddha, or you might feel the solid ground beneath you. And then you let the fear be there. You don't try and chase it away, but you don't allow it to dominate your mind. So this is the secret. You work with courage and fear by taking courage so that you're strong enough to have a courageous mind which is not overwhelmed by fear. So fear can be there in the background, but it doesn't overwhelm you. So this is letting fear arise within grounded, spacious awareness, without being afraid of the fear itself. Fear is just something that arises and then passes away again. It's just a conditioned co-arising, as we say. It's nothing to fret about. If provided you have a sort of courageous, steady attitude to life, then you can just let it arise and pass away. And this is what the Buddha used to do. He used to go into scary places like cemeteries, cremation grounds, and he would just establish this courageous, steady, determined mindfulness. And then the fear would arise, but it wouldn't overwhelm him. And then he just kept on doing that over and over and over and over and over until he mastered his tendency to fear. And then as he progressed, we are told that eventually it never came back. But he didn't do that by trying to chase it away. He did it by establishing courage. So this is the secret of fear. You solve the problem of fear through the practice of courage. This actually is a gesture of, this is called the Abhaya Mudra, the open hand held up, and it's spontaneously decided to come into my talk. I wasn't planning to do that, sometimes it happens. So this is the gesture of courage, and known all over the world as a gesture of fear not, I come in peace. And this open palm, it probably means I'm not holding a weapon. Look, it's one of the things it means, but it also means I'm not in this clench of fear and fight, and I'm in this. I'm in trust and cooperation. This was the way that the Buddha entered into, and he even met assassins in that way and overcame them. They were too much for his fearless, compassionate mind, and they couldn't follow through on their murderous intention. Anyway, I'll come back to where we're up to. We're not quite there yet, are we? For us, the way of overcoming fear is to cultivate courage through trusting what we have learned to trust and appreciating what we have learned to appreciate, and thereby dropping out of the reactive mind into the mind of openness, which is a mind, the kind of mind that doesn't get dominated by fear. So that's what I mean by grounded, spacious awareness. And maybe I'll say more about that in future talks. I've only got 6 minutes left now, so I'm going to come to my last point, which in some ways, one of the most important. This last point is feeling scared, have compassion for the frightened. What I mean by this is fear is a state of suffering, and when you are in a state of fear, you are suffering, and you need compassion. So one of the ways of responding to your own fear is have compassion for yourself, the frightened one. Have compassion for yourself. But it also means have compassion for others too, others who are frightened. Last week I mentioned Tonglen practice, and I said that Pema Chodron, who's written a number of books, always teaches Tonglen in her books, and I studied her teachings on Tonglen a few years ago, and she has a whole series of levels of practice, some of them quite demanding and challenging, like the one that we do in Smritiratna Buddhist order actually, but some of them are quite easy for even beginners to get into. And I want to share with you her simplest form of Tonglen practice. It's in 3 stages, and it's really 3 contemplations. And it goes, others feel this. May I grow wise through this. May we all grow wise. So those are the 3 contemplations. And they apply to any time you feel any kind of suffering, because it helps you to not get totally isolated by your own suffering, which actually only adds to it. It helps you to open your heart to others who suffer in the same way as you're suffering. So what that means is, the first step of the contemplation, others feel this, is to remind yourself that I'm not the only one in the world right now who's feeling what I'm feeling. So if you're woken up in the night, for example, and you're feeling scared, you can just remind yourself, others feel this. So even though you might feel initially quite lonely, there you are, it's 2 in the morning, and you can't sleep because you're scared, you can just remind yourself of all the other people in the world who have woken up in the middle of the night because they're scared and are feeling lonely. Probably millions, out of, I don't know how, is that 7 billion people there are in the world, 7,000 million. So even if it's 1 in 7,000, that's still 1 million people. So you're probably, I'm sure you're not alone. Must be thousands, hundreds of thousands probably of people who are feeling just what you're feeling, lonely and scared in the middle of the night. So you remember them, others feel this. And then the second contemplation is, may I grow wise through this. So the first contemplation is you've widened out your attention to include other people in the same predicament as you. And then the second contemplation is that you widen out your attention in time. You go, may I grow wise through this. So you just think, well, I'm kind of stuck in this horrible experience now, but if I can practice in the right kind of a way, this might be a gateway into a much better future when I feel wise and I feel much more strong and courageous, and I'm not overcome by things like that. And just by looking ahead to a better time, it helps you to feel not so isolated and stuck just in the time that you're locked into. May I grow wise through this. And then the third contemplation is, may we all grow wise. So then you remember all the other people who are feeling lonely and scared in bed in the middle of the night, and you want them to, for them, that they find a way of practicing and living their lives in such a way that they enter into a life of wisdom and courage and peace. You want that for them, not just for you, but for them too. May we all grow wise. So what this has done is that it's taken a state of suffering and turned it into a gateway into universal compassion. And if you can successfully do this practice, then it leads you into a state where you don't feel scared anymore, because your fear has been completely displaced by compassion. And you feel part of the human race, and you reminded yourself that, well, my suffering is the human condition, and my fellow human beings in different parts of the world are feeling this too, and I'm not alone, I'm part of it all, and I want them all to feel, I want them to find a place of peace. So this is like leading you out of reactive mind into creative mind. So just a very simple 3-stage contemplation. Others feel this. May I grow wise through this. May we all grow wise. And it's reminding you that if you find the appropriate way to practice with your experience, you can grow into a much wiser and more courageous person than you are now. You can make progress through the path of practice towards the place of peace. And there may come a time in years to come, maybe 10, 20 years' time, that you look back on this time, the time when you used to wake up in the middle of the night feeling really scared, and you can look back at that time. Maybe you in 2030 or 2040 look back on this time when you had struggled so much with anxiety and insomnia, and just have a lot of compassion for yourself, and then want to encourage yourself, you know. So sometimes this is what I do. I think, well, there'll come a time when I look back on this and I feel, I was really struggling back then, but now I've learned how to work with my emotions more effectively. And but that also helps you to be compassionate towards you as you are now, because you haven't learned that yet. You're just the way you are and you can't help it and you're scared. And then the other thing I would say, if you wake up in the night and you're scared, is okay, so you've tried practicing, you know, with your mind. You might maybe have tried that, and maybe it hasn't worked very well and you're still scared. Well, okay, have compassion for yourself and do something to just change the external circumstances. So maybe if you can pluck up the courage, you can get out of bed and make yourself a hot drink, or put on some music or something like that. Sometimes what I do is I make myself a cocoa and I put on Radio 3. Radio 3 in the UK, which is available online as well. Amazing program called Through the Night. And the presenters of that, my favourite is Katrina Young. And she has the most wonderful, gentle, tender, reassuring way of speaking. And then I can usually get back off to sleep with cocoa and Radio 3 if I haven't managed it with my Tonglen practice. So, you know, you just have to have compassion for who you are and what you can manage, and just meet your own needs. So that's the final one, is feeling scared, have compassion for the frightened. So those are my 7 basics for working with courage and fear. Courage is crucial. Take heart by attending to what you trust and appreciate. Trust the trustworthy. Appreciate the lovely. Let fear arise within grounded awareness. No need to be afraid of fear. And when you feel scared, have compassion for the frightened. Good luck.